So UCSF started the last lecture as a school-wide annual event in 2012. For this year's last lecture, a couple months ago, we were asked the student government to put together a nominee list. From that list, hundreds of students from all over UCSF programs voted. The winner of that vote is our speaker tonight, Dr. David Graham. Dr. Graham is a Bay Area native. He was born in Berkeley, raised in Palo Alto. His father was a geology professor at Stanford University, and his mother was a homemaker. He received his BS degree in biology from University of Redlands in 1967 before entering UCSF School of Dentistry. While at UCSF, he was the president of Delta Sigma Delta fraternity and served as the treasurer of ADS, Associated Dental Students. During his senior year, he met his wife, Pat, a physical therapy student at UCSF, and graduated in June 1971. After graduation, Dr. Graham immediately reported for active duty in the U.S. Navy at Mare Island, Vallejo, where he served as a dental officer for 18 months. He was then transferred to the USS Hancock, an aircraft carrier deployed to the Pacific during the Vietnam War. Dr. Graham was discharged from the Navy, married Pat, began practicing as an associate in Danville and Dublin, California, bought a home, and began teaching at UCSF School of Dentistry. Most importantly, Dr. Graham is known for his dedication to his students. Dr. Eaton, a clinical faculty in class of 1983, remembers Dr. Graham with deep appreciation for his dedication and patience. He says, "I was really struggling in my freshman year, and I thought I would never catch up and never be good enough. I almost wanted to quit, and for a while, administration pretty much did too." I'll always remember Dr. Graham's words and advice. He said, "Don't give up. Just keep trying, keep trying. Don't give up, never give up." Rhett Berg, a current D3, says, "I remember asking Dr. G for help for various things, whether reference for scholarship or mostly because I was worried about not making it through. Hand skills eluded me so much." Dr. Graham not only helped me, but he didn't just try to get me up to speed. He challenged me every day, holding my work to a higher standard than others. While others were only practicing mandibular molars, Dr. G was giving me maxillaries and would accept nothing but the best. I may have single-handedly kept the student store open practicing for Dr. G, but it was an invaluable mentorship that will stick with me throughout the rest of my life, where one day I hope to pass down all the things that Dr. G did for me: knowledge, patience, and hopefully one day his Datsun. Kat Wynn, current D4, says, "On my last day of sim lab, during the final check for a test case, he checked my restoration, stopped what he was doing, and he shook my hand. And he said, 'You're gonna do excellent in clinic.' She remembers it gave her such confidence while her transition into clinics." There are so many more stories I wish I could share today. Dr. Graham supports his students with a lot of compassion and reminds us every day that dentistry is just more than just passing exams and doing great dental work. It is about simply being a great human being. And so, on behalf of the UCSF student body, I asked Dr. David Graham, if you had but one lecture to give, what would you say? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great introduction, Taryn. Now I don't have to give my lecture. You did it already. But it's really an honor to be here in front of you. Sometimes I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I'll try to get over it. But I'm really humbled to have been chosen the first dental faculty to give this presentation to you. I want you to know that I'm healthy, unlike Randy Pausch. When he gave the last lecture, he was dying of pancreatic cancer. That's not the case with me. However, last week I was walking down the hall towards the dental school, and a senior faculty member said to me, "Hey, I hear you're going to be giving a farewell lecture next week." And I go, "Farewell lecture? I didn't know about that. Maybe the school's trying to tell me something." After all, I retired from UCSF 8 years ago. I've been on recall since then. I'm 73 years old. That's old. I've been around here a long time. I've taught over 4,000 dental students. So anyway, I don't think you can get rid of me that easily. Later in the lecture, I'll tell you when I think I might think about retiring or why I might for good, but not yet. So when I was nominated, I, like probably all the other 6 speakers before me, became very anxious. Like, I can talk about dentistry pretty well. In fact, my students all know I usually talk so much I go overtime in my lectures. But to give my last lecture, what am I going to say? And for a whole hour? Are you kidding me? Dr. Lowenstein here, Dr. Mitrovich, Dr. Top, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Pinderhughes, they all gave great lectures. The first lecturer of the last lecture was our own chancellor, Dr. Susan Desmond-Hellman. So I'm following some pretty great people, and it's, of course, making me a little anxious as to why would they choose me. There's probably plenty of other people in the dental school that are, way better than I am that could have been chosen. So I thought about, well, what am I going to talk about? So I know a lot of the people in the audience today aren't all dentists, and some of you know nothing about what my expertise in teaching here is at the school. Basically, I teach students how to do cavity preparations, a surgical procedure on hard tooth structure to receive fillings. We remove the decay and we put various types of materials to restore the tooth. So that's the aspect of dentistry that I teach. It's kind of like the art part of dentistry. I'm not really a scientist. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to teach some of the non-dentists, some of the lay people, if you will, in the audience, a little bit about the surgical principles of cavity preparation. And I'll just spend a brief amount of time on that because I don't want to bore you. But then I'm going to use those 7 steps as an outline to relate to you lessons that I've learned in my life. So on your right is a dental cast showing cavity preparations for silver fillings, amalgam fillings. And we do other types of cavity preparations for composite and plastic fillings and gold, but these are for amalgam. And amalgam requires a very definite type of cavity preparation for it to work, or it will fall out or break. And it was G.V. Black, Green Vardaman Black, who was the first dean of Northwestern Dental School, who developed a systematic approach to cavity preparation. Before his time, cavity preparation was rather slipshod, haphazard. There was really no rules governing it. So what happened is dentists basically in the 1800s would drill a round hole into the tooth, maybe get all the decay out, hopefully, and then they would take roofing cement for tile roofing that glues tile roofs to a roof, and they would use this roofing cement to fill the hole. Well, what happened is that the preparations were just round holes, and the fillings very shortly thereafter started falling out or breaking. And then the tooth would redecay, bacteria would leak into the tooth, decay would occur, tooth would eventually probably abscess, and then people had to go through very painful extractions. And you want to remember, back in the 1800s, there was no local anesthetic, so tooth extraction was quite terrible. And no antibiotics had been invented yet. Penicillin wasn't around. So people actually died from having teeth extracted. So it was a systematic approach that G.V. Black gave us in developing these principles of cavity preparation, 7 steps that I'll share with you in a moment. And if you follow these steps in order systematically, what happens is fillings last longer and thus teeth last much longer. So these are the 7 steps, and all of my students have this memorized. Last quarter's lecture to the freshman class, each one of these was the basis of a 1-hour lecture. And they are outline form, retention form, resistance form, convenience form, removal of remaining deep caries, dentin, finish enamel walls and cavil surfaces, and cleanse the prep. So I'm going to briefly describe what each of those steps means dental-wise, and then I'm going to apply those to lessons I've learned for success in life. And you can take it for what you want, but I think before you believe any of this, you should know a little bit about me, like where I come from and why I think like I do. So I want to share with you a little bit of my upbringing. And I think that's what most of the speakers in this series have done in the past, is you like to know about your teachers. So it's a picture of my dad and mom, Joe and Ruth Graham. Dad was born in Butler, Pennsylvania, to a very poor family. He was one of 6 kids, the only male. He had 5 sisters. His father, when Dad was in high school, his father took off. He couldn't handle all the bickering and nagging of all these women. So he took off for some years, and so in high school, my dad had to get a job, help keep the family together, and go to school. He was a very good baseball player in Pennsylvania and was known for his baseball prowess. So evidently, the University of Alabama offered him a full scholarship to play baseball. Dad was the first one in the family to go to college. Excuse me one sec. At University of Alabama, one of his classmates was the famous Bear Bryant, who coached the Crimson Tide. Well, at Alabama, he got injured, so he couldn't play baseball anymore, but they honored the scholarship, and he ended up majoring in geology and graduating Phi Beta Kappa. He then went to Chicago and entered Northwestern University, where he received his master's degree, and there he met Ruth. Ruth was a graduate of Northwestern, having majored in Spanish. They married, and then they moved west to Berkeley, where Dad was accepted for his PhD program in micropaleontology. What the heck is micropaleontology? Well, I'll tell you in a minute. The problem is that World War II started and it interrupted his pursuing his PhD. And because he already had studied a lot of geology and was a specialist in foraminifera, which I'll describe in a moment, he was sent into vital industry rather than being drafted into the military for World War II. So geologists were used to support our ships by discovering oil. And so he was, his PhD was interrupted and he was sent to Taft, California, where he worked in the oil fields as a geologist. So here's Taft, California. There's actually a picture of me in utero and out of utero. Well, I don't know if you know where Taft, California is, but it's nowhere. It's a little south of Bakersfield and a little west of Bakersfield, out in the middle of nowhere. And I suspect there wasn't much to do in those years, and that's how Mom got pregnant. So Dad was a specialist in a protozoan called foraminifera. So it's a single-celled organism that's no bigger than the pinpoint of a pin. And foraminifera, foramina holes, well, they were single-celled organisms with exoskeletons of calcium carbonate, and they had little holes where their protoplasm would stick out. These organisms were very abundant in the Mesozoic era, and particularly in the Cretaceous area geologically. And they used those when they would drill wells and they bring the core samples up. They'd use the micropaleontologist to look through a microscope and date the earth and tell them how far or close they were to oil. Nowadays, it's totally done differently. So Dad actually discovered a new foram, and he named it after me. So in the catalogs for foraminifera, there's a David Allenine. My claim to fame. So at the World War II was winding down in 1944 when I was born. And the day before I was born, Dad was accepted back into his PhD program, and they moved back to Berkeley. My dad's favorite story about that was, and he always said it jokingly, probably really meant it, is he would say, no child of mine is going to be born in a town formerly called Moron, California. It's true. It was named after President Taft. It used to be called Moron, California. Well, after he got his PhD, his first teaching job was at Texas A&M, and I was born in Berkeley. We moved to Texas, and I grew up speaking with a Texas accent. Hard to believe. And at 4 years of age, Stanford University hired Dad, so I basically grew up in Palo Alto as the son of a Stanford professor. Dad was a very popular geology professor, and one of his favorite courses, instead of calling it historical geology, he called it hysterical geology. So he made lecturing kind of fun. Maybe I got that from him, I don't know. So Dad died at a young age. In his doctor's office in Palo Alto, he had a massive heart attack from coronary artery disease, and so he died at 58. Mom lived on to a healthy old age of 93. So I'm now in fourth grade, got out of fourth grade, going to go into fifth and sixth grades in Palo Alto, and Dad was awarded a government contract on a sabbatical leave from Stanford to go to the Philippines to help the University of the Philippines get back on its feet in its geology department. So we moved to the Philippine Islands for 2 years and lived at the University of the Philippines, which is in Quezon City, a suburb of Manila. There let's see, I want to go back a slide, I think. No. So there I learned a lot. The culture was totally different than downtown Palo Alto. Boys up until the age 6 didn't wear any pants covering their genitals. They just wore a t-shirt. When they turned 6, then the mom would dress them in pants. The Philippines being tropical and warm, if it got cold, the mother would just put on a second t-shirt. I saw cockfights, highly illegal in the United States, pigs being roasted in an open pit on a stick. I saw what slums were. There was a lot of poor people in the Philippines, living in shanties. It's kind of like in downtown Oakland today, under the overpasses. It's a shame. So the lesson I learned living in the Philippines was that I really appreciate what we take for granted living in the United States. So we came back from the Philippines, and I entered 7th grade. In the Philippines, I was homeschooled in 5th and 6th grades, and that's why I'm still today so terrible in math. So I basically skipped 5th and 6th grades. Mom tried teaching me, but I guess I wasn't very receptive. So I had my first great teacher probably in 8th grade. Unfortunately, I can't remember her name. I got my yearbook out, but I couldn't find her. But she had us write our first term paper where we had to have a bibliography and footnotes. And so I learned a lot about writing, and my topic was a comparison of the world's great religions. There I learned a lot about the Golden Rule and found out that it's in every great religion in the world. It's amazing to me that we all can't get along if that's the case. Well, in junior high school, I took wood shop, took a course in metal shop. I took Spanish because my mom could help me with that. I love doing mechanical things. I built a go-kart. We steered with our feet. In high school, I took auto shop at Palo Alto High School. I took print shop. I had to be tutored in math, in geometry and algebra. I just like getting grease on my hands and doing stuff in the garage rather than studying, evidently. And this, of course, really worried my parents, being 2 college graduates. So they thought, whoa, we've got to find out where this kid's aptitude lies. And so they sent me to downtown Palo Alto to the State Employment Agency, where I took a series of tests. And the aptitude test came back saying, well, he'd make a good dental technician. He likes working with his hands. So I thought, well, what happened? I'm going to go for the whole enchilada. Why do that? The problem is, in high school, I didn't really prepare myself for pre-dental, pre-medical education. I never took biology class. I took chemistry just one summer, in a brief summer. So I really wasn't prepared in science. I took auto shop, and I convinced my dad to go down to a gas station in Menlo Park, and this guy was advertising this 47 Ford for $25. My dad said, if you can get that to our house, we'll buy it. It had no brakes, they weren't working, and the engine wouldn't rev up, it would just idle. And I had a motorcycle in high school, which don't know why my parents allowed that, but they did. So I was always working on that, and I fixed the brakes, but I was having trouble with the flathead V8 engine, getting it to rev up. And so I took my dad's tape recorder, and I tape recorded what the engine sounded like, because see, I was only 15 years old. We couldn't drive the car in the streets to a mechanic. So I taped it, took the tape to a mechanic, and he said, oh, I know what's wrong with that. He says, those flathead V8s had 2 sets of points, and one of them's missing. So I went down to the auto shop, bought another distributor, and stuck that in there, and the car ran fine. So I would race it up and down our neighbor's driveway. I mean, it's crazy. So I found out I like drilling holes. It's still with me. So I had a paper out, and unbeknownst to my parents, I took my money from my paper out, and I went down to the hardware store, and I bought a power drill. Before that, the only drill we had at home was one of those augers that you hand cranked. So this power drill was really cool. I bought a 1/4-inch bit. I took it home, and unbeknownst to my father, I went in the garage, which had no sheetrock, and I drilled holes in every stud in my dad's garage. He about killed me. Mom saved me. She said, oh, he's going to be a dentist. The other bad thing I did to my dad is when I was about 17 years of age, because I was curious, he had gone on a trip for a week, and so I took his engine apart in his car. My kids don't even know that. So I took the head off, took the valves out, exposing the pistons, and I couldn't put it back together again. I closed the hood. Dad comes home to start his car. His eyes about popped out when he looked under the hood. He had to hire a mechanic to come to our house to put the car back together. So in 1962, 63, I graduated from high school in 62, was accepted to go to college. I don't know why they took me, but they did. And Dad was accepted for a Fulbright scholarship on his second sabbatical leave from Stanford. And so we moved to Vienna, Austria for a year. There I had basically a good time. I was out of school. I traveled around Europe, got to go behind the Berlin Wall at that time through Checkpoint Charlie. Got to visit Zagreb, which is the capital of Croatia now. And there I got to attend the University of Vienna for 2 courses. I took a course called Deutsch für Ausländer, which means German for foreigners. In that class, there was 15 different nationalities, and the course was taught in German. We each had our own reader. Also, I took a course by a Fulbright scholar from the United States in U.S. history. So I basically had a good time in Austria. I had 2 American girlfriends that I hung out with. They taught me to drink wine and beer and smoke, bad news. And anyway, it's just a lot of fun. I got to travel around Europe a lot. Most fun I had was I learned to ski in Austria. So I want to tell you a little story about skiing. So I'm going to point up here at the screen. Whoops. This is a ski jump. You've seen them in the Olympics where they shoot down that and they go flying off and they land on the steep landing ramp. Well, I wasn't going to dare go off in the air, But my buddies and I thought, well, why don't we just go right up to the top of the landing ramp and we'll shoot that straight down into the bowl and then stop real fast. Bad idea. The skier before me went off and the thing was so steep that he disappeared from sight. I went next, and about halfway down, I started losing my nerve. And I was going about 60 miles an hour and losing my nerve. And I thought real fast, man, you better get it together. You better get mentally tough, because if you don't stay in your tuck and keep those skis going straight, you're going to die. Well, I didn't die, but I never did it again either. But I learned what mental toughness means. And so I've applied that to my dental students. Sometimes our students, especially in what I teach, lose their self-confidence and they have trouble doing a cavity prep. You see, we accept the best students in the world here, and it's mostly based on didactic information or courses that they've taken, not so much the art part of dentistry. So a lot of students, including myself in dental school, struggled with that, learning proportions and shapes. And so sometimes students will say, I just can't do it. I'm going to give up. Right? So we have to have a little discussion about being mentally tough and gaining your self-confidence. So we got back from Europe and I entered college. I attended the University of Redlands. That was kind of cool. I got to go there, a private school for free tuition, because Stanford University had a tuition exchange program. And so a Redlands professor's son or daughter could go to Stanford for free. Basically, I was too stupid to go to Stanford. So I decided, well, what am I going to do in life? So I always had this idea about being a dentist in the back of my head. So I thought, well, I'll go pre-med, pre-dent route. So the counselor said, well, wait a minute. You had a lousy chemistry course. You never took biology. How do you know you could even survive this? So the first year I had to take biology for non-science majors. And in doing that, I met two great teachers who really turned me on to the biologic sciences. And so I did very well. So the next year I ended up majoring in biology, minoring in chemistry, and just loved it. At Redlands, we had small-sized classes, so in upper division courses, we maybe would have 8 students is all. And we always had the professor and no TAs. Probably the reason I survived that experience is I have an amazing drive and perseverance to accomplish things. I could outstudy anybody. So I was wiping out all these pre-med students, getting better grades than they were. They were really ticked at me. But that all paid off. I applied to 5 dental schools and got into every one of them. During Redlands' time, President Kennedy was assassinated, just to give you an idea what was going on in the world at that time, and Vietnam was going strong. So we had to get good grades or we were going to get drafted. Right, Ed?
Oh, yeah. Unless you had a really high number in that lottery.
Yeah. So I come to UCSF to go to dental school. Fortunately, now, it was between this school and the newer school at UCLA at the time, but I chose this one. And fortunately for me, I did, because that's when my dad died, midway through first quarter D1 year. He had a massive heart attack. And so I had to leave school for a week. Well, we had started like all our dental students do in anatomy in the axilla, and our class had to also learn all the muscles and vessels and whatnot of the arm and the hand. And I never did, because I was gone that week. And the first midterm was not a written midterm, like multiple choice or something. They really wanted to know if you knew your stuff. So it was an oral exam. We had 2 anatomy instructors, Dr. Coleman and Dr. Kaiser, and they would take us one by one up to the skeleton or to the cadaver and just rake you over the coals, testing you on things like innervations, what nerve, what's the blood supply, what's the function of this muscle. I was the last one in the class to take that oral quiz when I came back, and honest to God, I never did learn it. And so Dr. Kaiser, Graham, it's your turn. He takes me up to the skeleton and he says, tell me what the big nerve is that runs down this side of the arm. Well, I had taken comparative anatomy in college, so I said, well, I think that's called the ulnar nerve. He says, you're right, you're done. So what did I learn from that? Having compassion for our students. So that's why I am the way I am. And have compassion and empathy for our students, because every year a parent dies or something is going on here, you're going to be deported. It's been going on this year, threats of deportation, just stuff happens. And so I think we just have to have compassion and go with the flow. Like I say, we have all these very smart students and they can get over these hardships and we just have to help them. So that was one thing that was big that happened when I was in dental school. The other big thing that happened my freshman year is I won the national lottery. Can you imagine that? That's why I have so much money today. Not really. You didn't want to win that lottery. It was the draft lottery. Up until that time, it was very unfair the way they drafted people to the military. If your mom or dad had the money, they could probably keep you out, particularly if you were a politician. And people would feign injuries and stuff. It just wasn't working well. And so they started the draft lottery. They took every day of the year, put it in a hat, and they pulled them out. Unfortunately for Dave Graham, they pulled out my birthday, September 14th, number 1. So I thought, oh my God, now what? If they leave, they said they'd leave people alone that were in dental school, medical school, and the clergy. They'd let them finish school. But then you were fair game. Well, can you imagine how devastating it would be to start a practice, borrow the money, and then get drafted and have to go? So I saw the handwriting on the wall, and I thought, oh boy, I better join the military. They wouldn't pay for dental school, but it was called the Early Commissioning Program. So I was like an ensign during dental school. We didn't even have a uniform, and no money was paid to us. You just owed 2 years active duty when you graduated from dental school. So that was kind of a life-changing situation for me. I picked the Navy because I figured, well, in the Army, you're probably going to die. Which of the 3 branches of the service am I least likely to get killed? Not thinking in the Navy, dentists supply the Marine Corps. But fortunately, I didn't have to join the Marines. Another thing happened was my senior year in dental school, I was two-timing. And my wife is here, she knows. She's not laughing. So these are all hygiene girls. I was dating one of them, and then my wife came here, she was a graduate of Davis, came here for PT school. And I kind of liked her looks. So I started dating 2 of them. Guys in the audience, don't ever do that, especially if they're housemates. Can you imagine? I'm so embarrassed. I still don't know why that wouldn't work, but my 3 grandsons here, you're going to have to ask your mom to explain this to you later. So that was a lesson. Don't do that. So I got out of dental school, and the next month I reported to Mare Island Naval Shipyard, where they built nuclear submarines. And there I learned about my limitations. Here I was, this hot UCSF dental student, knew everything. And I met my Waterloo. The captain of our clinic would rotate us through doing just fillings, and because we had no oral surgeon at the base, he would rotate us through doing exodontia, doing extractions. So my turn came to be doing extractions. And I'd never taken a wisdom tooth out in dental school. But I got lucky. When my time was there was a submarine tender in port there, and submarine tenders are staffed with oral surgeons. because they really take very good care of submariners. And he came into our clinic and he taught me how to do third molar impactions. He'd do one side on the patient and then he guided me doing the other side. Well, Dave Graham got cocky. He thought he was really good at this. The oral surgeon wasn't there. I was taking out teeth successfully, and then all of a sudden I met my Waterloo. I took out a low vertical bony impacted wisdom tooth. And unbeknownst to me, the tip of the root was in the mandibular canal, and I ripped the vein, not knowing I had, and the patient was bleeding, and I sutured him up and let him go, and I was done with that operation at about 9:30 in the morning. That afternoon at 5:30, that sailor comes in, white as a ghost, blood all over him. He vomited in the waiting room about 2 pints of blood. I took his blood pressure, it was 60/40. Oh boy, I wasn't prepared for that one in dental school. What do? I called up the oral surgeon that had been helping me. He says, I'm in bed with the flu. I'm so weak I can't get out of bed. He says, take your sutures out, take some 4x4 gauze, cram it down there in socket to put pressure on that torn vessel, and then start an IV and go to the drug cabinet and get out some ephedrine so we can up his blood pressure. Start an IV? Are you kidding me? I never did that in dental school. I'm sitting there alone with this guy. Ephedrine, how much do I give him? So anyway, I got through that. I did it because I had to get mentally tough again all of a sudden. And this mental toughness thing is going to go with you through your career. All of a sudden, something's going to happen that you didn't plan on, or maybe you weren't even trained for, and you're trying something maybe you shouldn't be doing, and this will happen. My suggestion is to know your limits and live within those limits. And if you want to do that kind of stuff, go get some good training. So after a year and a half at Mare Island, I got orders all of a sudden to an aircraft carrier, which had 3 dentists on it. One of them had to leave. There's 2 of us just out of dental school, and then a senior officer who was an alcoholic who we never saw in the dental clinic. And so when I first got to the ship, they asked me to remove a wisdom tooth on a pilot. And because the other 2 dentists didn't feel comfortable doing that. So I knew a little bit about it, and that went successfully. He was so thankful, he took me up on his jet airplane. And so that was pretty cool. The other thing that happened is I met the ship, and we went out from the Philippines out on the line in South China Sea, and we bombed for 2 weeks, 1973, getting close to the end of the Vietnam War. It was just constant, 24 hours a day. Down in the dental clinic below decks, you're trying to work on a patient, and when the catapult shoots a plane off, the whole ship would go like that. And if you didn't have good hand rest and go and jerk with the patient, you'd be all over the wrong teeth. So we came back, the ship's tour of duty after 2 weeks. It had been gone for a year from home port Alameda. So we went to Japan, bought motorcycles and stereos, and then we went under the Golden Gate to Alameda, and then they sent the ship to Hunters Point to have the flight deck replaced. So during that time, because the dental clinic was down because they couldn't supply us with electricity all the time while they're doing that repair, they decided that us 2 young dentists should be anesthesiologists. And so they sent us to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, no book work, no didactic work. They just shoved us right into the OR, assigned to an anesthesiologist who taught us how to put people to sleep. I learned to intubate people. I learned to do spinal blocks. I learned all these drugs like curare and stuff I'd studied about and got to see them working. And to intubate a person, you have to paralyze them, basically. So I learned about scopolamine, halothane, fluothane. So I did all these procedures. Thank God I never had to do that on the ship. And the reason they trained us on the ship is in time of war, if the physician that did that for the surgeon on the ship was killed or horribly wounded, they were looking for the dentist to do it as a life or death emergency. Basically, from Vietnam, I learned that war is no good. At least that one was no good. And I lost 2 friends. One was a chopper pilot in Vietnam, and one was a navigator on a fighter plane. There was only one good thing for me that came from being in Vietnam, being a Vietnam veteran. One good thing. I can go to Lowe's and Home Depot and get 10% off. So I got out of the Navy June of '73. And my life changed drastically. Out of the Navy, married Pat, we bought a condominium, started private practice. I started my own practice with a classmate, and after 2 years we went broke, so I had to leave that. We'd only made $50 in 2 years after paying the bills. And so I left that, just cold turkey, here, you keep it. And I went to work for 2 other dentists, one in Dublin, one in Danville. And I needed to eat, so I came here to UCSF to see if I could get a job teaching a couple days a week. Well, at that time, a lot of our faculty were retired military. This was kind of a scary place to go to dental school, actually. We always felt as students like they were trying to flunk us out, and they didn't have a lot of empathy or compassion for us. And so we had to put up with that. But Dr. Schuhart and Dr. Watkins hired me. Dr. Watkins I replaced for teaching preclinical operative dentistry after a while. Dr. Schuhart was the head of the operative department, and those were my, my mentors. They wanted me to do some lecturing. And I've told a lot of the students this story already, but for the rest of you, I'll tell it again. In college at Redlands, there was a requirement for public speaking, a speech course. Dave Graham was deathly afraid of getting up in front of an audience. I put off taking that course until the last semester of my senior year. So I came here to UCSF. They wanted me to do some lecturing, and Dr. Schuhart knew that I was afraid of getting up in front of a group, even a group of dental students. So he just took it upon himself to fix me. And what he did is he came to me one day and says, Dave, I've signed you up to give a lecture at the American Dental Association National Convention in Kansas City. It'll be in front of a room a little bit bigger than this group. I go, oh my God. And so anyway, that fixed me all right. From then on, I don't get nervous about public speaking. So probably the reason I was hired by Dr. Watkins and Schuhart is because they were both ex-Navy. So I worked as an associate and taught, an associate in 2 offices and taught dental school 2 days a week. I worked hard 5 days a week. And after 10 years, I turned 40 and thought, well, I should not be working for other dentists. I better go on my own. So I started my own office, and right away I had to hire an associate because I was so busy. But the main decision I had to make was, do I just practice privately? Do I just teach? Or could I possibly do both? Well, because I like to work hard, I decided I'm doing both, and that was the best decision I ever made. So Pat and I raised our family. Brian and Mark, we have 2 sons. I have a dental lab at home because I've always made my own gold, whoops, sorry about that. I've always made my own gold crowns in my little dental lab. So when my kids were real young, I think probably Mark's about 3 years there, he had just finished waxing his first crown, and his brother was congratulating him. But we had a lot of fun, you know, we had a lot of fun growing up. So lots of memories. 3 years ago, I retired from private practice. My youngest son, Mark, took it over. He went to dental school here. My oldest son is a geologist in Idaho, and I'll talk more about the families in a moment. In retirement now, I'm on recall for the past 8 years. I teach 2 days a week, and my brother-in-law, John, is teaching me how to do construction. And I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. We're 15 years into building a house because we're doing it all ourselves, the driveway, everything. And so what that's doing is keeping me strong and healthy, and I'm learning all kinds of stuff. So students, what's the first principle of cavity preparation? Right. So that is, for the lay people in the audience, the shape. The shape of the cavity preparation is kind of outlined in dots here. And that outline is determined by the amount of decay in the tooth. Also, having access to get in to get the decay out of the tooth you might have to make that outline wider because decay spreads under enamel laterally. So the outline of a cavity preparation is constantly changing while you're working on the tooth. You start out minimally and expand it. It's also, the outline is dictated by the material that we're filling the tooth with, whether it be gold or porcelain, plastic, amalgam. So all these things dictate the outline form. So how do I apply this to lessons in life? Well, we all have plans and goals for our life. Be prepared, they're gonna change. You have to be able to adapt to these changes. I mean, look what happened to me just because I won the lottery. It's probably one of the reasons I'm teaching here today. Also, you're confronted with a world where things are changing awfully fast in materials and in the technology that we use. Just to give you an example of what has changed since I was a freshman here in dental school, I want to go over a few things with you, some technological changes. This was still being used here at UCSF. It was a slow-speed, belt-driven drill. The air high-speed handpieces were just coming out. So basically, we learned with the air high-speed, but now we've gone to what? Electric handpieces. Big change. Root form implants didn't exist when I was a dental student. What we did to replace missing teeth was to make removable partial dentures or bridges. So we would, if you had a space between two teeth, you put a crown on each tooth and put a crown between them. That's all cemented onto the teeth as one unit. Not that many bridges are getting done anymore. Lots and lots of implants are. So I had to learn about implants. Cast gold crowns, lost wax technique is changing. Now we're going to CAD/CAM technology, where we pass a wand over the patient's teeth to program a computer. We design the crown in the computer and then send that information to a grinder, if you will, that grinds out the crown that very day. So changes that you have to get used to, and you have to learn all this technology. Virtual and augmented reality in education is occurring. A company just contacted us. It's based out of Fremont, California, that makes your syllabus or your syllabus for your dental morphology technique. They're going towards this augmented virtual reality. And so here we're looking at teeth in 3D. That's probably going to change education. Other changes in my life. When I came to dental school here, the seniors were all doing stand-up dentistry. It was our class and the class before us that took ironing boards and altered a few chairs in the clinic to prove to the faculty that this was a much better way to do sit-down dentistry. Composite filling material was just in its infancy, something called Adaptic. It was just terrible, but it was not allowed. We were not allowed to use it in this dental school. It was too new. Glass ionomers hadn't been invented yet. Enamel and dentin bonding hadn't been invented yet. Acid etching hadn't been invented yet. And because composite really wasn't there yet, cosmetic dentistry didn't really even exist. Digital radiography has replaced the old analog film x-rays. Electronic health record is here. CAMBRA, what's that mean? Caries management by risk assessment that Dr. Featherstone, our former dean, taught us. And Dr. Featherstone has led us to practicing dentistry using the medical model, which not that long ago we didn't do. It's kind of like a physician or surgeon taking out the infected part of somebody's appendix and leaving the unaffected part. And then a year later having that infected and having to go back in. What dentists did to treat caries is we just surgically removed the caries and put a new filling in and didn't really teach people how to stop getting cavities. Now we're doing completely different. We're doing using the medical model. So what's going to happen in your future? I don't know, but maybe you're genetically going to grow a new tooth and root form implants are going to go by the wayside. There's great advances being made in genetics. I could see that maybe happening. What's the next one is retention form. That's the shape that we make the cavity preparation that prevents the filling from falling out. And so what we do is we make convergent walls and we make undercuts that help lock an amalgam filling in. So how am I going to relate that to lessons learned in life? Well, and this just does not apply just to dentists, but probably to every professional in this room, is burnout happens to us. After a while, you get used to maybe doing the same old thing. It gets kind of boring, or running your practice and all the stresses of that get to where you hate to go to the office anymore. And so you start to experience burnout. And so I want to discuss a few ways to help prevent that. Take continuing education. Get interested in something else. Join a study club. Do like my classmate Ed Bruno. He practiced general dentistry for years, and he went back to school and became an orthodontist. Get into politics. American Dental Association, AMA, California Dental Association. I did that. I served on the Council for Education and Membership at the state level. That was fun. Be a teacher. That's probably what saved me the most, is being able to come here and teach. I even got to be an expert witness for the federal government and for the state government in helping to prosecute a dentist that was the most egregious narcissist the state of California has ever seen. What he was doing is making fake cavities in patients, and then while they were asleep, the first appointment, he would take digital radiographs, because those have a time date printed on them. Then he'd have the patient back in, put them to sleep, and not record they were ever in the office. And he would do is drill into their teeth and then put a soft cement into the tooth and take analog x-rays and submit those to the insurance companies that these were cavities. He did so many unnecessary root canals and crowns, it made me cry. So the state went to his office, seized his computer, seized everything, and hired me to be a detective, which I had a lot of fun doing, because I had figured out what he was doing. So that guy right now is in federal prison. So anyway, there's ways around to get burned out. So the next principle is resistance form. That's the depth of the cavity preparation and the angles that we make. Sorry. Okay. These angles that we make, we try to make them rounded rather than sharp. Anyway, it's this depth and these rounded angles that keep the tooth from breaking and keep the filling from breaking. So you can see here there's some fillings that are breaking, probably because the depth of the cavity preparation wasn't deep enough. So how am I going to relate that to lessons in life? Well, don't ever put your own interests before your patient's. Always keep your patient's interest in mind. Don't be doing fillings on stained teeth from coffee stains and cola stains or tea stains. That's going on rampant in our profession right now. Don't be doing deep cleanings on people that don't have gum disease or only have 3mm pockets. That's going on all over the place. And it's hard to catch these people, but we all know what's going on. And it's not just dentists. I remember reading about a cardiac surgeon up in Northern California who was doing unnecessary bypass surgeries. It happens. There was a pharmacist that was just going to jail now for doing sexual things to patients. I mean, it's unbelievable. So stealing and taking advantage hurt not only you, they hurt the patient, and ultimately they ruin the profession. My advice is to practice the golden rule. Stress, teeth break if we make sharp line angles. So nowadays we make them rounded, and that keeps the tooth from breaking, as you can see from these stress studies. Stress, dentists and physicians I know are always under stress, and you need to be able to recognize it. If you don't, it can lead to marital problems, it can lead to substance abuse, suicide even. It's better to be able to talk these things out with your peers, do sports activities, yoga, things like that. It's a very subtle, invasive type of thing. So the next principle is convenience form. That's the width and location of the preparation edges so that we have access with our instruments to the tooth. Well, this was a tricky one a little bit, convenience form, so I played off the idea of convenience. You know, we as practitioners can't do everything well. We kind of tend to limit our practices to those things we like to do and that we do well. And what you want to do is make your life more convenient by not adding the stress by doing procedures you don't like to do. And so we use the expertise of others. So like use an orthodontist, use an endodontist, use an oral surgeon. This will make your life a lot easier. And that even goes into everyday life, I've learned. Hire an attorney to make your trust or your will. Hire an accountant to do your profit and loss statement. Don't try doing all that stuff yourself. These people are much better at doing what they do well than you are. Even hire a financial advisor. I can't keep track of the stock market, and so we make some money and you want to invest it. These people, to me, are very well worth it. So to me, that just makes things more convenient. But Access has something else to do. I want you to take a look at Mike's freshman dental class. All males, except for Helen. That poor gal endured a lot, believe me. All Caucasian and Asians, one Hispanic, Mario Pedroza. We have come a long way. Now we have more females in class. And we have persons of all colors. I'm proud of that. So removing deep decay, this is where I really get kind of serious because I help Dr. Centauri teach ethics. So in removing the deep decay, we try to do that towards the last step in case we get an exposure of the pulp. And sometimes we can accidentally get an exposure of the pulp. And if we're not careful, that can happen. And then the patient's going to have an expensive root canal and a subsequent expensive crown. So it gets expensive. I've noticed in my recent years here that there's been a big increase in moral degradation in our society. There's a me first attitude from business people, corporations, our politicians. Who can we trust? Facebook? Evidently not. Volkswagen? Evidently not. There's sex abuse going on. There's all kinds of gun violence. We need to remove this moral decay, and I hope you'll help me, or we have to reestablish trust. If we don't, the expense to society is going to be great. Where do we healthcare professionals stand? Well, dentists have been dropping from 62% in 2006 to 2016, 59%. That's our trustworthiness. That's lower than nurses, pharmacists, engineers, and physicians, but I don't think they're that great either. But at least we're higher than cops, college teachers, the clergy, and then it gets interesting. Lawyers, senators, car salespersons, I always knew that. Congress, that's pathetic. Where does Trump stand? Sorry, I couldn't resist that sermon. So, as a practitioner, I recommend that you be sincere, be humble, treat others as you would yourself, go the extra mile for your patients. All that worked for me. It's better than advertising we care or gentle dentistry is delivered here. It's your actions that matter, not your words. Dr. Charles Bertolami, our former dean 10 years ago, was big on ethics. He said treating patients is not a given right, rather it's an earned privilege. Good message. Next, we're going to plane and smooth the enamel walls. That's where we assess our cavity preparation. We critique how we did. If it was a really good one, you may even admire your work. So what I'm going to do is look back on the highlights of my life quickly. I have a family, a loving wife, 2 sons, and their families. So I'm going to introduce them. You can all meet them out in the hall later if you want, but here they are. Brian is a geologist he went to school at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Then he went to University of Washington where he got an MBA. He currently works for an engineering firm as a project manager for large interstate energy projects where they put high-powered energy lines across states. Cindy, his wife, is a graduate of the University of Virginia in business and marketing. Today, she works for St. Luke's Hospitals in Boise, Idaho, and is the director of digital strategy. Their children are Casey, Tyler, and Emily. Brian's my second son, Mark's 3 years younger than Brian. He's a graduate of this school, dental school in 2006. His wife, Sarai, is a dental hygiene graduate in 2004. It's interesting because they actually met right in 2 seats up there during the white coat ceremony. Sarai also was graduated from our Master's in Dental Hygiene program in 2012. Their 2 children are Isla and Easton. So, what would it be like if I hadn't had a career here at UCSF? I mean, I really owe the school a lot. First off, I wouldn't have met so many of you, such intelligent and appreciative students. You keep me young. When I go to alumni meetings and students will come back to me like Dr. Abbott and say, you know, I was thinking of you the other day, and tells me a story about maybe how he was doing a tough prep or something, and says, I remember what you taught me. That's really heartwarming. Also, if I hadn't have been here at UCSF, I wouldn't have met so many outstanding faculty that I've been able to consult with, who have helped me through my career, taught me things that I didn't know. It's amazing. I've taught with wonderful people. I wouldn't have been an expert witness if it hadn't been for UCSF, and I certainly wouldn't have summited Mount Rainier with Dr. Featherstone, with my sons and Dr. Featherstone and his friend Casey. We climbed Mount Rainier, and so he taught me a lot about putting each step carefully, or you're going to fall in a crevasse or down a very steep slope. Also, I would not have taught my son Mark in dental school. This is the School of Dentistry annual magazine. We were on the initial magazine, on the cover of it. The reason for that is that we were raising money 12 years ago for the 4th floor lab, to remodernizing it. So I raised $300,000 myself. I went to the dean's office and said, you know, I've been around here a long time. Go back about 10 years and then give me the last 20 years of classes and give me the phone numbers of all those students that their office phone numbers or home phone numbers, and I'm going to call them and twist their arms for a donation. It'd be pretty hard to say no to David Graham. The trouble is, sometimes I had trouble getting through the receptionist, so I'll tell you a cute little story how I did that. I'd say, well, go tell Dr. So-and-so that it's David Graham on the phone. He'll remember me, because they all do. And tell him that there was a lab exam, a test case, that we recorded wrongly, and he really failed it, and he's practicing dentistry without a license. They came running to the phone. But the thing I'm most famous for is being on that highly scientific program called the Mythbusters. It's been shown all over the world. I've had people call me up from New York, Singapore, all over the place. Hey, I saw you on Mythbusters. What that was all about was one spring break, I had to come up here to school for some reason. I'm walking down the hall, and these 2 guys with the cameraman caught me, and they had a skull, and they wanted me to put a silver filling in the skull, because what they were trying to do was debunk the fact that Lucille Ball claimed that every time she drove by a radio station in LA that she could pick up radio signals in her teeth. Well, if you knew Lucille Ball, she was nutty like that, and she for sure was putting people on. But you know what really hit home is the other day I told a few students about Lucille Ball. They didn't even know who she was. That's why I got to retire pretty soon. So the last step is to clean out the prep. It's almost done. All we have to do is clean it up and fill it, and my presentation is almost done. So closing advice. Know when to retire from practice. When you're truly burned out, when you have a bad attitude helping your fellow mankind, or when you physically just can't perform anymore. Maybe your eyes are going bad, your neck's bad, your back's bad, who knows what. Retire. How about from teaching? People have been asking me, this isn't really your last lecture, is it? And I kind of tease them and play them on. And so I'll tell you about when to retire from teaching. When you won't take on new responsibilities. When you lose your curiosity. When you lose your patience with your students. When you can't adapt to change anymore. Or when you can't contribute anymore. That's when you need to retire. Now, I joke with the students, say, well, I'm not going to retire. The reason when I'm going to retire is when my students start laughing at me instead of with me. That actually happened to a faculty member when I was in dental school. We were laughing at him. Not cool. So enjoy life. Enjoy life outside your profession. Take vacations. Explore other interests. Me, I still like mechanics. I like doing gardening around my pool and take care of all my own gardening. When I retired, I had less responsibility, so I bought 2 motorcycles. We keep up in the mountains in Idaho, and we go in the wilderness riding dirt bikes. And I still have my original car, my Datsun 240Z that I restored and souped up, and I've actually driven that at Infineon Raceway. So, and I just love skiing still. And you want to keep on learning. You know, you've heard this trite comment called the lifetime learning. I hate that term. I'm sick of hearing it. Just keep learning. And it doesn't just necessarily mean you got to keep learning in your profession. I mean, you should do that. I hope you do that. But there's other things to learn too. So I developed this interest. I always wanted to build a house. So my brother-in-law, John, over here, he's a contractor. He's built about 10 homes. So he's teaching me how to build a house. We're doing this together. We poured the driveway ourselves. We framed the house, built the trusses. We put in the windows, put on the roof, did the electrical, did the plumbing. Now we hung the sheetrock, even textured some of it. And so I've learned a lot of trades, which is kind of fun. And basically it's kept me strong and healthy. So thank you, John. Lastly, always appreciate and help and thank those who help you. Now, I don't have all the staff shown here in the dental school because there's people in sterilization, there's people all over this dental school, administration that help. To me, you're a big family and we keep this place running smoothly. So thank you so much. And then on the right, there's a picture of the staff in my office. One of them, my dental assistant was Karen, was with me for 25 years. In fact, she's still working in the office with my son, Mark. But we always thank people who help make you successful. They're part of your family. To summarize, strive to achieve your goals, adapt to change, welcome challenges, keep an open mind, continue learning, earn your patients' trust, and place their interests before yours. Practice the golden rule, enjoy life outside your profession, and above all, love and cherish your family. So I want to thank my wife, Pat, for all her support these many years. It's been 45 years we've been married now. Same time I've been teaching. Thank you, and it's really been an honor to give you this year's last lecture. Okay, stop it. I'll get emotional.